First off, when I was preparing for this interview, I was thinking in terms of image, because every time you walk into a room, very conscious of your image. How important is image in this day and age, and style or presentation in a business environment?
I think image is important. It's not the be-all and end-all, because there's no point having the image with no substance. You've got to have the two. But for me personally, I think it can definitely make me feel that little bit more confident and that little bit more me, which then tends to transfer to, better impact.
Yes, so power dressing, but not necessarily a suit and tie, power dressing into something that you're comfortable with.
I think so. I remember there was one day when I went into the office in yellow shoes and everybody was just like, oh my God, I'm not sure AIB or Ireland's even ready for this. So, that's one of the things about me as a person. And I've learned to own my Marmite status. I think I went through the first part of my career desperate to be kind of loved by everybody. That was never going to happen. So now I've kind of got to a place where I kind of think I am a bit different. Some people are going to love that and welcome it, and other people are going to run for the hills. It's just going to be not for them. And I'm okay with that now. But for a long time, that kind of caused a tension for me.
Well, one thing that makes you unique and different to most people is the amount of energy that you bring into a room. What drives you and what gives you that energy?
I've got to a place now in my career where I'm doing what I absolutely love and what I really am passionate about and what I think I'm best at, which is talking about engagement, leadership, culture, communication. I've got more time now to devote to the things that I love, and I spend less time doing some of the things that I didn't love in the past. So I think that's a good way of giving me energy, focusing on what I'm good at and what I love. What I've tried to do in recent years is really focus on things like my sleep, which to me is, the fundamental thing of all when it comes to energy. If you're not sleeping right, and you'll know this yourself, your kind of chances of having high positive energy the next day are drastically reduced. So I really focus on that. Exercise is a great stress relief for me. That kind of keeps my energy levels up. But I do put on a bit of a show as well. I'm not kind of naturally this kind of high energy person all of the time. I do really try because I think it's not just what I say, but it's how I say it that makes the difference. And if I can say it with energy and passion, then it's more likely to connect than if I just say the words.
How do you pick yourself up from the negative dips?
One thing that I do is I really focus on breathing. So I learned this really great technique called rhythmic breathing, which is when you're in a state of funk or stress, if you just stop and you focus on your breathing. So you breathe in for 4 seconds, you hold, and then you breathe out for 4, and you hold, and you repeat. What it does is it takes away all of that anxiety. It kind of gets rid of the fog in your brain, and it moves you back to a place of coherence. The other thing I would do, though, is I'd just desperately try and find perspective. And that usually requires stopping, taking myself out of a situation, maybe distracting myself with some music, going for a walk around the block, doing some exercise, whatever it might be, but something that kind of stops me spiraling and kind of recharges me a little bit.
That's excellent advice. Thank you. Baking's particularly popular just now in the lockdown. In leadership terms, when you talk about baking a pie, what do you mean by that? And explain why it's so powerful and why it was so powerful to me when I heard you talk about it.
So yeah, I talk about this leadership pie in some of the kind of talks that I give. And basically what it says is the typical leader, probably 70% of their time is spent doing, 20% of their time is spent leading, and then about 10% of their time is spent on other stuff like planning. What this model advocates, and what I firmly believe, is that the healthy leadership pie, the ideal pie we should be aspiring to, would be 70% of our time leading. So that's up from 20 to 70. And then 20% of our time doing, down from 70. And then probably 10% of our time on the planning, the development, the outside, and the self-care. So there's a massive shift between where I think most leaders are spending their time and where I think they could be. And I think there's a number of reasons why that's the case. So, I think it was Herminia Ibarra who said that 85% of leaders are operating at the level below their pay grade in business. And I think that's probably true because we stick to what we're comfortable at a lot of the time. And also we get a bit more of a buzz out of doing stuff than out of leading, because it's a bit less tangible. But I also think there's some kind of mindset reasons why we don't spend as much time leading. One is we tell ourselves things like, my boss wouldn't really appreciate me spending my time just doing one-to-ones. They'd much rather there was steam coming off the keyboard and I was delivering loads. So I think there's some assumptions that people have built up around what does, value look like that I think are a bit faulty. So for me, I think, one of the challenges we all have when it comes to leadership is, are we getting the right pie or are we spending too much of our time doing it? Because the other thing is, every time we do something, we are robbing ourselves of time to step back, and we're robbing our people the opportunity to step up and take bigger steps.
The obvious question then is, if we want to start changing that, how do we start? How do we go about it?
Well, I think we have to start reframing what our role looks like as a leader. And I also think we need to start, perhaps working on some of our assumptions. Still for a lot of leaders these days, they still believe their role is to have all of the answers, whereas I believe their role is to ask the right questions and to kind of delegate decision-making as low as they possibly can. A lot of leaders don't want to do that. They kind of want to retain the control and the decision-making power. Maybe try delegating a little bit more, being a little bit more trusting, a bit more empowering, and just see what happens.
In other words, empowering our teams to cut loose, really.
Definitely. And I know there are loads of reasons why we're scared to do that, because we tell ourselves things like, oh, my boss has asked me personally to do it, so I need to do it. We also tell ourselves things like, my people are too busy, I couldn't possibly give them anything more to do, or if I give it to them to do, they won't do it as well as me. There's all of these kind of mindset things going on and assumptions that stop us from doing it. And that's kind of where I think the work lies. This isn't about building leadership capability. This is about moving leadership mindset and getting leaders to see their role and their people's role quite differently. I think the other thing with empowerment, though, Ewan, is it's not enough just to give it when we think about ourselves as leaders empowering. Yes, it's one thing to kind of give people the responsibility, but what if they don't want to take it? So how do we kind of help them want to step up and take those steps? I think that's part of what we need to do as well.
And when we talk about engagement, it's not just a leadership trait. When we're engaging with our peers and even upwards, what simple advice would you give for dealing with each other and treating each other with respect, I guess?
Well, I learned a really important lesson when I was at AIB. So I remember we got leaders together at the RDS and we were talking to them about their role in engaging other people, like their direct reports. And I think part of the feedback we got, which I'll never forget, was, what about us? Does our engagement not count? And I thought, oh my God, how did we miss that? So ever since that day, which was probably in about 2014, whenever I do work with leaders on engagement, I never start with how do you engage other people. I start with how do you protect and boost your own engagement? Because I think the more that we can do that, the more engaging we're going to be with the people we lead, but also the people we interact with and the people above us. And I think in terms of, managing upwards, I think, as leaders, we kind of start to think that our role is to do what our bosses want of us, and we are there to kind of fit their mold and meet their needs. And I don't agree with that. I think it has to be a two-way street. I think we need to be able to articulate to our boss, no matter how senior we are, what our engagement needs are, and also hear from them, what they want from us, and we contract. I think it's an interesting phenomenon. I see that as people get more senior, they almost feel like talking about their needs to their boss is almost a bit junior, and I think it's absolutely essential.
Yeah, to create organisational change rather than individual change, I guess.
Absolutely. And you know what? These leaders at the top of the organisations are the ones that are setting the tone. If they are sending out a message, either overtly or covertly, that I'm Superman or I'm Superwoman, I don't have any needs, I don't need any recognition from people, that's going to permeate through the culture at other levels and is going to be really unhelpful. So I'm a big fan of kind of what I call vulnerable leadership, authentic leadership, people at the top of the organisation not coming across like robots, but coming across like real human beings who have good days and bad days, because that's what builds the emotional connection, that's what builds the trust. But for so many leaders, they find that really hard to do. They feel like it's going to expose them, they're going to lose credibility. My view is the less they do that, the more credibility they lose. But it's a real hard one to convince people of.
So you talk about engagement being emotionally connected and trust. How do we do that in the current environment?
Well, do you know what? I've been really impressed by how leaders have stepped up in terms of engaging people through COVID. And I think what's interesting about COVID is it's almost forced us to engage through change in a way that we might have resisted before. It's forced us to trust people working from home. It's forced us to stay connected. It's forced us to check in on people and see how they're doing. And I think that's brilliant. I think the interesting thing for me, though, is we have a choice post-COVID. We can either unlearn all this great stuff that we've learned, or we can apply it going forward. And my hope is that we apply it going forward.
In terms of developing the best version of ourselves, what would your advice be to go about that? Is that a case of letting go of the comfort blanket, to use your term, I think?
I think there's kind of two angles to it. I think the first angle is I'm a big believer in understanding your strengths and playing to them. And it amazes me that, a lot of people don't really know what their strengths are, and therefore they can't really configure the jobs they look for and what they do each day towards that, which I do think brings around more engagement and a better version of you. But I think you're right, there has to be a little bit of the stepping out of the comfort zone as well. We need to feel like we're being stretched and developed and staying fresh for us to be, feeling tip top. Because ultimately, if we think about the people who are going to be most successful in the future, they're not going to be the people who know the most. They're going to be the people who can learn the most, the people who are the most agile at adapting. So for me, it can't just be around sticking to what you're great at. There has to be that with a bit of a dollop of, but keeping yourself fresh as well. I heard a quote recently which really stuck with me. I've never heard it before, actually. It's from Mark Twain. And it said that the two most important days in your life are the day you're born and the day that you realise why you were born. And I love that, because I think the more we can understand our purpose, our personal purpose, why are we here on this earth, and the more we can understand our strengths and the more we can kind of combine the two and channel that into a job or a portfolio of work that plays to that, the better we're going to be and the more engaged we're going to feel. And as I say, I just want to add a little bit of a dollop of stretch on top as well, so we stay kind of future fit.
I love that quote myself. It really resonates. You've had a long career in increasing engagement and really empowering teams. What's the best lesson you've learned yourself over your career?
Well, I can see where a lot of companies go wrong, and I can understand why they go wrong. So, for example, you see companies thinking that rather than measure engagement once a year, if we measure it more regularly, engagement will go up. It won't. It'll just tell you that it's not where it needs to be more often. So I always find that quite interesting, that people think just by surveying that will increase engagement. I actually think if you survey and you don't do anything meaningful on the back of it, engagement goes down. You'd be better off not surveying. I see a lot of organizations thinking that, the apps are the answer. So let's put out a recognition app where everybody can give each other a virtual high five. I've got nothing against that, but for me, it's the cherry on the cake. It's not the cake itself. Because for me, the cake is great leadership, great culture, helping people be the best version of themselves. It's not really those kind of faddy things. The other thing I see is a lot of organizations only really talk about engagement when it's survey time, and then they kind of go quiet. And when everybody gives their opinions, it tends to be just a few people in quite senior roles who then try to do anything with it, and it takes forever. That's a lesson that I've learned, in my career, both in-house and as a consultant. The more you can make engagement everyone's accountability, and the more you can drive it at a local team level, the further you will go. You will always need to do some stuff at an organizational level as well, but let that be the 30% and let the team piece be the 70%. And I think, when I think about my experience at RSA Insurance, at AIB, working with Virgin Media in Ireland, more recently with Yorkshire Building Society, it's when you make that shift to focusing on the local rather than the global, that's when engagement kind of really takes off.
Once again, excellent advice. Just to wrap up, a few quickfire questions just to breed up from you, if that's okay. Your favourite book or one you've read recently?
There are a couple of books that I have read in the recent past, which I think are really good. So one is Triggers by Marshall Goldsmith, who's a coach in the US. And the other one is The Way We're Working Isn't Working by Tony Schwartz and John Gomes. And what I think are great about those books are they talk about what are the things that take our energy off a cliff. What are the things that kind of make us question our own value? And they kind of help us diagnose what's going on in that situation. And they kind of help us with tools to kind of help rebuild ourselves. One of the things that I took from the Tony Schwartz book is there's this lovely thing in there around 3 lenses to which you look at a situation. There's kind of the reflective lens, the reverse lens, and the long lens. And when you think about the reverse lens, if someone says something to you and it triggers you and it makes you feel crap, just think about what was their intent. Was their intent to make you feel crap, or was their intent something else? And I think I've spent so much of my career taking things personally when they were never intended that way. It was just what people wanted to say and I took it that way. So that's really helped me kind of look at things in a slightly different way. But also, they talk about how we manage our energy. And truthfully, the better we are at managing our energy, the more engaged we're going to be, and the more engaging we'll be as well.
And have you listened to any good motivational talks or TED Talks recently?
Well, there are a couple that I really like. One is Emotional Agility by Dr. Susan David, who's a South African lady who I actually got to meet. And also I'm a big fan of Brené Brown. So, there's the classic one she did on vulnerability, which is great because, she says what makes you vulnerable makes you beautiful. And I'm a really big believer in that. I think being an authentic leader, showing you're not perfect, that's a great way to engage and inspire people.
You've given me a few great quotes already, but what's your favourite quote?
It comes from Isaac Asimov, and it's your assumptions are your window on the world. Dust them off from time to time to let the light in. And I just think that is so good because we spend so much of our time at work holding on to these assumptions and they don't always serve us. Separating the facts from the feelings, thinking about people's intent, all of that is a great way to kind of make our life taste a bit sweeter and not get so down by what people say and do to us.
Brilliant stuff. And many thanks for your time. To wrap up, if someone wanted to reach out to you, how do they go about it?
Come to LinkedIn. They'll find me on there, Anthony Burrows, the one with the spiky blonde hair. And there's our website as well, www.intelligent-emotion.com.
Well, fantastic. Thanks again for all of your energy and sharing it with us as a wider audience. Much appreciated, and take care.
Thank you. Thank you very much.